I shall come forth as pure gold. tell God we want to bless him today. We come to be a blessing. Hallelujah. No matter what you've been going through all this week, no matter what you've been facing, we come to encourage you today, to let you know, though trials come on every hand, keep pressing your way. God got your back. Come on, wave those hands out there in Zion. Come on, give him glory. Come on, give him glory. Hallelujah. We come to bless you today. God, we come to bless you today. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Just encourage your heart. Listen, listen. I feel like going on. I feel like going on. Don't trials come on every hand. On every hand. I feel like going on. Hallelujah. Somebody's about to give up today. Somebody's about to give up. You can't throw in the towel. Listen. Oh, yeah. I feel like going home. You can't give up, my brother. You can't give up, my sister. Oh, I feel like going home. Don't trials, they will come on every hand, every hand. I feel like going on. I feel like pressing on. You gotta tell the devil you can't have the victory. Oh, I feel like pressing on. Don't trials, they will come on every hand. Hallelujah. Oh, I feel like pressing on. Oh, yeah. I feel like going on. Don't sickness. Hallelujah. I feel like going on. Come on, lift those hands and say, don't give up today. Don't trials, they will come on every hand. I feel, hallelujah, because you've been so good. I feel like going on. Yes, I do. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, going on. Though many trials come my way, I feel like going on. Don't trials, come on every hand. Don't trials, they will come on every hand. Don't trials, they will come on every hand.
trials come on every head. I like that. So try your song. Anybody ever had some trials to come? When you seem like you got over one hurdle, here comes another hurdle. Weeping may endure for a moment. That's weeping may endure for a moment. I feel like going home. Oh God, we come to thank you. Thank you for another day's journey. Thank you for being our. Thank you for that you have done in our lives. We thank you for being Jehovah Jireh. We thank you for being our provider. Thank you, oh God, for all that you have done, all that you are doing, all that you will do in and through us. Bless us, oh God, to be the kind of people you would like for us to be. We know, God, that we have made mistakes on yesterday, but thank you for your grace and your mercy for seeing us through our yesterday moments. And thank you for the gospel message that says that we all have sinned. We all have fallen short. But we thank you for the gospel message that, oh God, when we give over to you, every day becomes new. Thank you that in this day we have brand new mercies. Thank you, oh God, that you look at us in this day of being your children by the blood of the crucified Lamb. Now go with us in this preaching moment. Give us clarity. Give us power to preach. Give your people a receptive ear and give them a listening ear and a receptive heart. In Jesus' name we do pray. And all the saints of God said amen. God is certainly a good God, and he is worthy to be praised. We thank God for another week, for it's another day's journey, and we're glad about it. In this moment, we thank God for our guest psalmist of the hour, Brother Carlton Kitchens, who is always blessing God's people through song. And I thank God for him and for his friendship and for his kinship. Thank God for him coming and being a blessing to the body of Christ on today. We know that he is running in a race to represent this city. And I go on record to say that Brother Kitchens has my full support. Amen. And let it be known that the enemy, Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But our God has come that we may have life and have it more abundantly. We thank God that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. That's the gospel message that we thank God for this moment. Proverbs 17:17 says that a brother loves at all times, and a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born in times of adversity. And we thank God for he being able and willing to put his name and put his heart on the line to move his community forward. I thank God as well for the citizens of Macon-Bibb County. This is a crucial couple of weeks leading up into our election here on August the 11th. Call your friends, call your family. Tell them that it is expedient for them to vote. We know that voting is your voice, and let your voice be heard. No longer will we be marginalized and put on the back burner. Injustices are all around us, so we want to make sure that we stand up for righteousness. There will be giants. There will be mountains. But with God, all things are possible. New Pilgrim, we're looking for you to get out to the polls, your friends to the polls, your neighbors to the polls, to make sure that we make this community what we will desire for it to be. We have had friends who have stopped by out of their busy schedules to share with us some community notes leading up to this election. And we thank God for our brother Clifford Whitby, who have stopped by on several occasions to tell us and show us the way. And so let us go and make sure that we do the right thing and make the right choice on this upcoming weeks leading up to August the 11th. If you have your Bibles, if you'll turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter number 17. Last week we dealt more closely with verse number 29. This Sunday morning we want to deal with verse number 32. Verse number 32. 1 Samuel chapter number 17, verse number 32. Listen, if you will, as the text is tailored to teach us in this manner. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." I want to talk for just a little while on this Sunday morning using this thought, asking this question: are you ready to fight? Are you ready to fight? And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Are you ready to fight? Are you ready to fight? On last week, we posed the question, is there not a cause? That question was asked by the tender servant David, who we met as a shepherd boy tending his father's sheep. Such a humble young man, but a giant in his spirit, man, because he knew that he could do all things when God was on his side. When you look at David and David's questions that he posed in the moment of fighting a giant by the name of Goliath, you understand that David knew the answer to the question because he knew the God by which he served. David on last week asked the question, is there not a cause to fight this giant? And on last week, we discovered that when you are employed by God, you're able to fight any giant that comes your way. See, being employed by God is different from being employed by your typical employer. Because when you are employed by God, no weapon formed against you shall be able to prosper. When you are employed by God, Daniel will tell you that you may end up in a lion's den. But don't you know that when you are employed by God, the lions will have a situation of laying down like little lambs. When you are employed by God, Noah will tell you that sometimes it feels as if God is not going to show up. But when you are employed by God, Noah will tell you that after 120 years, here comes the rain that God promised would fall. Do I have a witness in this house? When you are employed by God, don't you know Ezekiel will tell you that sometimes you'll be misunderstood. Sometimes you don't know which way to go. But when you are employed by God, don't you know you can be in valleys full of dry bones, and all of a sudden the chattering of the bones would come back together when you understand that this is not your fight, but the fight belongs to Almighty God. Don't you know that the bones that are down in the valley will come back together again? Don't you know that when you are employed by God and you realize that this is not your fight, but the battle belongs to the Lord, not only will the bones come back together, don't you know God is able to speak to the winds from the north, the wind from the south, the wind from the east, and the wind from the west. And don't you know that these bones can become living souls once again? I'm not so concerned about everything that's going on wrong in Macon and Middle Georgia, but I'm concerned to ask this question to God. Lord, you know how the bones can come back together. You know how Bellevue can come back together. You know how Pleasant Hill can come back together. You know, dear Father God, how the Peach Orchard can come back together. You know the answer to all things. Here we are. When you are employed by God, you're ready to answer any call. On last week's lesson, we understood that when you are employed by God, you're ready to answer any call. Verse number 15, verse number 17, and verse number 32 let you know that David was ready to answer any call. He was ready to answer the call of his father to feed his sheep. And when you are employed by God, and Brother Kitchens, when you want to go and do the will of God, you got to know that you are employed by a good God who will not lead you into the valley without preparing for you a table before you right in the presence of your enemies. I serve a God who's able to feed you when your enemies want you to starve to death. Here it is. When you are employed by God, you're ready to answer any call. David was ready to answer the call to feed his father's sheep. David was ready to answer any call, not only to feed his father's sheep, but he was ready to find his brothers. Don't you know that somebody is down in the valley trying to get home? It may be your sister, may be my brother, but somebody may be down in the valley. When you are employed by God, you don't have to worry about the ditch diggers because you serve a God who's able to build a bridge across any ditch. Grandmama said it like this: He is able to provide a bridge across troubled water. When you're employed by God, you're ready to answer any call. He answered the call to feed his father's sheep. He answered the call to find his brothers. He answered the call to fight against this giant. You got to be ready to answer the call to fight the giant of injustice that plague our community. You got to be ready to fight the giant of racism that plague the entire world. You got to be ready to fight the giant of bigotry that's all over this land. I ask the question, are you ready to fight? You got to be ready to fight. When you are employed by God, he was ready to fight. He was ready at any call. And then, Brother Kitchens, he was ready at any circumstance. Don't you know that my Bible tells me that verse number 37 said he was ready for any circumstance? Because when you are employed by God and you're ready to fight, don't you know your God will be able to deliver you out of the paw of the lion. And every now and then you can find yourself in the paw of a lion. But God is able to deliver you out of the paw of the lion. He's able to deliver you not only at every call, but every circumstance, out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear. If you're not afraid of lions, I tell you that when a big bear comes your way, God is still able to deliver you out of the paw of the bear. And then my Bible says you got to be ready for any circumstance. David says, I've already been delivered out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear. So certainly my God is able to deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Let me tell you, your enemies may have you all surrounded. It may seem like you're at your wit's end, but it's at your wit's end that when you give it to God, when you're at your wit's end and it seems to be a dead end, God will make an expressway out of no way. How do you know? I listened to Big Mama talk. And Big Mama told me that when it seemed to be no way, God is able to make an expressway. Do I have a witness in this house on today? Have you ever been at your wit's end? Have you ever faced life's dead end? Have you ever been at that place where it seemed like the lion had you boxed in, the bear had you boxed in, but then you looked up to God and say, God, it's for you I live. God, it's for you I die. And God delivered you out of the hand, the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear. Certainly he'll deliver you out of the hand of the Philistine. It is. Bible says that he was employed by God, ready to answer any call. Employed by God, ready to answer any circumstance. He was employed by God, and he was employed by God, ready to face any cost. Any cost. That's what he said. I will go fight this Philistine no matter the cost, because I know my very life is on the line. David said, when I stand before this giant, I may look like a little bitty boy in front of this giant. And so I know that this Philistine has the capability, because he's been fighting all of his life. Since he was a youth, he's been fighting. Growing up, he's been fighting. So certainly everybody's afraid of this Goliath, this giant. I know the cost may cost me my very life. But that's what Jesus said, that when you follow after him, you got to deny yourself. You got to take up your cross. You got to follow after God. Why? Because it demands your very life. Don't you know that every day won't be sunny? Every day won't be fairly outside. But every day God will walk with you through your valley, through your turmoil, through your circumstance, through your tribulation. Do I have a witness in this house that know that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all you can ever ask, think, or imagine? David, that was last week's lesson, was employed by God. And so is there not a cause making Middle Georgia to fight this giant? Just because David slew the giant back in 1 Samuel 17 does not mean that we're not still facing giants in 2020. But there has to be a little bit of David who's been going through their own battles, coming up through the ranks that God has shown them victory after victory, that now is willing to put their life on the line and stand up against the giants in 2020. We got to have some people, if Macon is going to be the place we want to live, move, and produce good families, somebody has to fight against this giant. Somebody has to stand against injustice. Somebody has to stand and call folk out. Can't be scared just because people don't want you to preach. Can't be scared to stand up for somebody who you know has the right heart. You cannot be afraid of the giants that you face as long as you serve a giant slaying God. Here it is. David asked last week, is there not a cause? This week, David moves down from verse number 29 to verse number 32. Let me tell you, every now and then, you got to slide your life down from verse number 29 and get to verse number 32. You got to prepare yourself in verse number 29. You got to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Is it worth my time? Is it worth my community? Is it worth my effort? Is it worth my name being broadcast and scandalized on every soundboard? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? But the cause that you stand up for has to be bigger than your life itself. And when you stand for a cause that's bigger than your life itself, you'll stand for God. And don't you know that somebody must stand against the inequities of our age, even if it demands that you stand up by yourself? Do I have anybody that'll stand up for Jesus? Here it is. Is there not a cause? David said, I had to come with the conclusion of the whole matter, say, yes, there is a cause. Now, in verse number 32, he says, I will go fight. And what I like about what David said, David prefaced his going to fight as being, first of all, your servant will go fight. See, the servant has to understand that he has to do things in accordance to who he serves. You got to be willing to stand and fight because you understand that you are a servant. And when you are a servant of the Most High God, there's nothing you ought not be willing to do for the God who gives you breath to breathe. There's nothing you ought not be willing to do for the God who gives you eyes to see. It's nothing you ought not be willing to do for a God who decided to send you in his world in the first place. Don't you know that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Here it is. I got a question making. Are you ready to fight? You know that we got plenty of things to fight for. But my question is, are you ready to fight? David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail him, because thy servant will go and fight this Philistine. David not only had to fight the giant called Goliath, but David had to fight some giants right there in his own camp. Giants are not only on the other side with the Philistines, but David had to fight some giants in his own camp. And it's amazing that even in 2020, we're still fighting giants in regards to our enemies, but we're still having to stand up and fight giants in our own camp. Do I have a witness in here? Here it is. David said, I am ready to go and fight. Are you willing and ready to fight? You got to be willing and ready to fight. Not only because you're employed by God, but you're enabled by God. You're enabled by God. David had to not only fight the giant in the enemy's court, but there were some giants in David's own hometown. First of all, he had to fight against dissuasive cowardness. Verse number 24 says that David had to fight against dissuasive cowardness. When you are wanting to go fight for God, there will be some dissuasive cowards who will try to dissuade you and persuade you not to go fight. Verse number 24 says, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. When you are ready to go fight, you got to fight from people, even in your own circumstances, who don't want you to go fight because they don't have the heart to fight. All of their lives, they've been laying down to the giant. All of their lives, they've been yes sir bossing to the giant. All of their lives. And so they want you to have dissuasiveness in your thoughts because of their dissuasive cowardness. But don't you know that your God has not given you the spirit of fear, but that of power, love, and a sound mind? You got to fight against dissuasive cowardness. That were those who were belonging to the camp of Israel who were saying, because I'm scared, because I am afraid, I don't want you to go fight because your name is going to be bigger than mine. That's the problem. Too many crabs in the bucket. So many people so afraid to stand up for people who look like you. Don't you know if Macon has had 176 years in existence and only 8 years of an African American minority male, something's wrong with that picture. Dissuasive cowardness, scared to stand up for righteousness. Not only do you see verse number 24 shows dissuasive cowardness, verse number 24 shows dissuasive cowardness, and then verse number 28 shows destructive criticism. Now, if dissuasive cowardness wasn't enough from the people inside of Israel camp, then destructive criticism, verse number 28, brings it on home for David. Verse number 28 says, and Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why camest thou down hither? With whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and thy naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. Don't you know that there are people in the camp who are jealous, who are envious of you? But then you look a little bit closer. His oldest brother. His oldest brother. His oldest brother didn't want him to fight because he wasn't getting the glory himself. There's a whole lot of brothers out here. David's brother didn't want him to fight because David's name would be sung a little louder than his brother. There are some brothers out here, envious brothers, jealous brothers, haughty brothers, scared to fight. And because you don't want your name to be tarnished, you don't want nobody else to fight. But somebody has to fight. dissuasive cowards in the camp of Israel. Destructive criticism coming from his own brother. There are some brothers in this neighborhood who would rather tuck their tails between their legs and run off like an old beat-up dog than to stand up for their community. Let me say it again. Somebody must stand against the inequities of our age, even if it demands that you stand up by yourself. Instead of being a destructive criticism coming from the brother, maybe you should join hands with your brother and hold your brother's hands up. Dissuasive cowards. Destructive criticism. And then you move on down to verse number 33, you'll see deflective concern. Deflective concern. Verse number 33 says, and Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth. And he is a man of war from his youth. Let me tell you, some people would deflect their concern and say that you don't have what it takes to be the man that God has made you to be. But let me tell you, when God has been allowing you to face lions, bears, certainly whatever is in your path, if God is for you, He's worth more than the entire world against you. When God is your spokesperson, you don't have to do anything but approach the battle. And when you get there, God will speak for you. Do I have a witness? Deuteronomy chapter number 20 says, when thou go out to battle against your enemies, and you see horses, and you see chariots, and you see men that are stronger than thou, be not afraid of them, for the God, your God, is with you, who has brought you up out of Egypt. If He did it for you one time, suddenly He'll do it again. I'm out of here. I'm out of here. But when you are ready to fight, not only is the Goliath on the other side, there are some giants in your own camp who smile in your face. All the while want to take your place. Backstabbers. If the OJs were here, they could come and sing a congregational song to a whole lot of these hypocritical Negroes and say, smile in your face. All the while, want to take your place. Backstabbers. You ought to stand up for something, or you'll fall down for anything. Are you ready to fight Macon and Middle Georgia? Are you ready to fight against dissuasive cowardness? Are you ready to fight against destructive criticism? Are you ready to fight against deflective concern? And you have to be ready to fight against depressive confidence. Don't you know there is a depressive confidence? Because the enemy said, and the Philistines said unto David, come now, I will give thy flesh unto the fowl of the air. Oh Lord, the Philistines said, not only will I give thy flesh to the fowl of the air, yes, Lord, and I will give thy flesh to the beast of the field. Don't you know that there are enemies around you who want to devour your flesh? But when you stand, yes, Lord, For the rock of your salvation, he will hide you in his pavilion. Do I have a witness under his loving arms? Yes, my Lord. That's the reason when I'm depressed, I look to the Lord for his safety. He hides me. Do I have a witness under his care when the enemy is all around me? I remind him, Lord, I am fighting for you. Yes, my Lord. And don't you know, every now and then, when you approach the battle against your enemies and you go against a Goliath, you don't have to worry about how you're going to defeat him, because the Lord has been training you when you kept the sheep how to pick up, yes, Lord, 5 smooth stones. Yes, my Lord, when the enemy has on armor, when the enemy has a sword, you can be like little David, pick up 5 smooth stones. Do I have a witness? He picked up a smooth stone with an alpha, picked up a smooth stone for the A, picked up a smooth stone for the I, picked up a smooth stone for the T, picked up a smooth stone for the H, a smooth stone. Yes, my Lord, by faith you can walk, by faith you can talk, by faith we live, by faith we move, by faith we have our being. Do I have a witness? And when you get 5 smooth stones, don't you know, when you go to the giant, you can look at him and say, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Don't you know, just pick up a smooth stone when the enemy throwing dirt on you. Pick up a smooth stone when they are cussing you out to your faith. You pick up a smooth stone. Don't pick up a javelin. Don't pick up a knife. Don't you pick up a sword. You pick up a smooth stone. Do I have a witness? Well, what is the smooth stone? I tell you, the smooth stone is your God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all you can ever ask, think, or imagine. Pick up a smooth stone and say, no weapon formed against you shall be able to prosper. Pick up a smooth stone, and when you got ditch diggers, when you got people who want to throw mud, don't you know you serve a God who desires for you to go through the spiritual car wash of your soul. And when they throw mud on you, the spiritual car wash of your soul will be able to skeet you off with the blood of the crucified lamb. I don't have to worry about the mud because I've been through the spiritual car wash of my soul. And every day he washes me with his blood. Do I have a witness? I've been bought with the price. Jesus has changed my my whole life. What a wonderful change come over me. Yes, my Lord, go forth and fight your giants with a smooth stone. You can take out the giant with a smooth stone. Say yes, yes to his will, yes, yes to his way. Well, preacher, don't leave me right here. What is the smooth stone? I tell you, was the smooth stone. He was hewn out of the rock. The smooth stone was hewn out of the rock. What is the smooth stone? He came down through 42 generations. The smooth stone did not come in a mansion on high, but the smooth stone came down as a lamb before his shearers. The smooth stone was laid in a manger. The smooth stone anointed crowds at 12 years old. The smooth stone, yes, my Lord, went on up a hill called Calvary. They spit in his face. The smooth stone put thorns on his head. The smooth stones, they pierced him in his side. Blood, yes, and water came streaming down. The smooth stone dropped his head in the locks of his shoulders. Didn't he die? I said, didn't he die? Didn't it die? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Oh, yes. Yes, he did. They put the smooth stone in the rock, inside of the rock, and took a rock and closed the rock in. But early on Sunday morning, the smooth stone come busting up out of separate cup. All power in the smooth stone hand. Do I have a witness? And since the rock has the power, you hold your rock. You hold your rock. You hold that rock, and you speak out for the rock. Because if these were to hold their peace, don't you know there's some smooth stones in Bellevue, some smooth stones in Unionville, some smooth stones in Bloomfield who will speak out for the rock that's higher, 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 higher than I. Say yeah, yeah, woo, yeah, woo, Are you ready to fight? 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 When you fight, you gotta bob and weave, throw some jabs, spiritual jabs. You don't have to use these. Use the word that's hid in your heart. The word that's in my heart. I will not sin against thee. Let them throw these, but you throw the word. 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 Yeah! Ah!
got to hold up.
We got to hold
The
up
blood-stained banner.
blood-stained banner.
We got to hold it up
We got to hold it up
until we die.
we
Oh, we are soldiers. We are soldiers in the army. In the army. We got to fight. We got to. Although we have to cry, we got to hold up. We got to hold up the blood-stained banner. We got to hold it up.
We got to hold
Down
it
till
up we
listen. My mother, she was a soldier.
Oh, yeah.
She had a hand on the God's supply. Listen. One day she got old. She couldn't fight anymore. She said, I stand here and fight on anyhow. Oh, we are soldiers. We are soldiers in the army. In the army. We got to fight.
We got to fight.
Although
we have to cry.
we got to hold up
We got to hold
the
up
blood-stained banner. We got to hold it up
We got to hold
until we die. My mother, she was a soldier. She had a hand on the gospel supply. Listen, one day she got old. She couldn't fight anymore. She said, I stand here and fight on anyhow. Yeah, we are soldiers in the army. We got to fight. Although we have to cry, we got to hold up. Yeah, we got to hold it up until we are soldiers. We are soldiers in the army. We got to fight. Although we have to cry, we got to hold up. We got to hold up. Yeah, the blood-stained banner. We got to hold it up. We got to hold it up. We got to hold it up. Through racism, through bigotry, we got to hold it up. We got to hold it up. Hold on, my brother. For strength, for racism, for bigotry, for powerlessness, for diversity. We got to hold it up. We got to hold it up. We got to hold it up.
We gotta hold it up
We got to hold it up.
in the morning.
We got to hold it
We gotta hold it up.
We got to hold it up.
Fight at noonday.
We got to hold it
We gotta hold it up.
We got to hold it
Fight in the evening.
We got to hold it up.
The sun.
We got to hold
I
it
said
up.
the
We
sun
got to hold it
is
up.
going down.
We got to hold it. We got to hold it up until
Have a good
we die.
Have a great week. Have a great week. Have a great week. Hallelujah.
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 Hallelujah. Yeah. The storm
Yes, sir.
is passing on over.
Hallelujah.
Have a good week.
Hallelujah.
Have a good week. Have a great week.
Hallelujah.
We gotta hold it up. We gotta hold it up. We gotta hold it up. Hold it.
We got to hold it.
I said hold it.
We got to hold it up.
I said hold it
We
up.
got to hold